Okay, so for this project on ageism, I wanted to play to my strengths, and I decided to make a presentation, and I attached the slides separately so it's a little bit easier to see. But I wanted to make like a training session about the impacts of ageism. So I have my boyfriend here. He has not seen any of the slides, so it's going to be his honest thoughts as we go along to kind of see what people's general thoughts on ageism are. Alright, so the very first thing I'm going to have Zach do is I want him to take a couple minutes and just imagine what the different life stages look like. So I want him to think about what a child looks like, a teenager, a young adult, a middle adult, and an older adult. So he's just going to take a couple minutes to think about that, which we will do now. Alright, so then after I give him a couple minutes to think about each of these, he's now going to draw each of these, and I want him to draw them. Obviously, it doesn't have to be beautiful, but with as much detail as he can. So he's going to work on that now for each of the 5 drawings. Okay, so now he just worked on his drawings, which I will also attach all the pictures. But now for each category, he's going to write written descriptions about certain categories. So the first one, I want you to write 3 just general physical appearances. 1 capability, so 1 mental capability and 1 physical capability. 2 behaviors that are common for that age group. 2 things that would describe their personality. 2 for like common emotions, and then 1 about their health status. So we will now work on that. Okay, now that he has gone through and made his list of written descriptions for all the age groups, the last thing I'm going to have him do is I want him to highlight the characteristics or written descriptions that are more positive in pink, and the ones that are associated as more negative in yellow. If there's some that are like kind of neutral, like they don't really have a positive or negative connotation, just don't highlight them.
Okay.
And then once we're done with that, for each age group, we'll total up the total of positive attributes and the total of negative attributes, and then we will compare them when we're done. Alright, so just went through and tallied up the positive and negatives for each group. So for our first group, the child group, Zach had put 5 positive attributes and 3 negative. Then for a teenager, we also had 5 positive, but now 4 negative. Then for young adult, we have 6 positive and 6 negative. Middle adult has only 2 positive, but 8 negative. And older adults had 0 positive and 11 negative. So now I kind of wanted to just provide some education from what I've learned in this class to Zach. So I have some slides that kind of maybe explain what ageism is, how maybe that influenced your thoughts a little bit, whether you knew it or not. So first, just to define ageism, it refers to the stereotypes, which is basically how we think, prejudice, which is how we feel, and then discrimination is how we act, directed towards others based specifically on their age. So ageism is at both the societal and the personal level. So societal would be like, an example would be like job discrimination against an older adult, or sometimes even young adults who don't have as much experience. At a personal level is something called, like, an example would be elder speak. So, we like talk to generally older adults like they don't understand us, and like we talk in a more simple language, even though they might not necessarily need that. So in general, sex, race, and age are the first characteristics that we notice. So that's why ageism is so important, is because we notice someone's age and we make assumptions based on that a lot of the time. So stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination all influence each other. So if you have a certain stereotype about an individual, that often can lead to what we feel about them and how we act towards them. It's important to remember that age is biologically and socially determined. So biological is like if you're 67, your body is 67 years old. But socially, it's also determined by how other people in society view you. So that can definitely vary across cultures. So, for example, some countries might have different voting age numbers or like drinking age, because that's just how they view the maturity of certain people. So that definitely varies across country to country and just culture to culture. Okay, so then continuing, I just wanted to provide some examples in different aspects of life of how ageism can be shown. So, for example, in our health and social care, one example is that older adults are often excluded from research, even if they are a population that are like specifically impacted by this medical condition. A lot of times those older adults aren't included in those trials and research because we're afraid they're fragile or that they can't handle it. In the workplace, so oftentimes older adults tend to be less likely to be hired, but if they are hired, they're less likely to be given adequate access to training, and those who experience ageism are often more likely to retire early. In the media, older adults are definitely underrepresented, and when they are represented, they can be portrayed in a very like negative or like kind of like the butt of the joke a lot of the times. In the legal system, sometimes there are mandated retirement ages, which can be unfair because someone may reach a certain retirement age but still be physically and mentally capable of doing a job and not want to retire. At the interpersonal level, a study showed that out of 57 countries, 34 of them were classified as having moderate or high ageist attitudes by the people in those countries. And oftentimes, countries with a lower income have a higher prevalence of ageist attitudes. And then lastly, self-directed. So this is someone who portrays ageist thoughts towards themselves. In Panama, the study was done on people ages 18 to 65, where 46.3% of the participants have reported that they've had self-directed ageist thoughts, and it's usually against physical capabilities. So if someone has a disability or as you age, your physical ability declines, they often have more ageist thoughts towards themselves. So then last thing I kind of want to talk about is just solutions that we can put in place to kind of help combat ageism, because it is such a problem, even though we might not always think about it, is policies and laws can be put in place that enforce prohibiting age-based discrimination. We already have some of those, but we need to make sure that they're in all countries, and we're implementing new laws to make it better, but we're also revising old ones that aren't strong enough. Also just providing education. So this project is a perfect example of, like, I had the opportunity to do more research and I get to share my information with you. So basically just providing education brings awareness of this issue and then personal biases that we may have, because when you know better, you can do better. Promoting contact and interaction between all age groups. So having, younger adults working with older adults, they can kind of understand each other better and create a better relationship. Also just gathering more data about ageism, so that kind of helps with the education and we just know like the impacts of it. And holding ourselves accountable and others. So if you hear someone making an ageist comment or acting in a discriminatory way, we can try to call that out. And lastly, self-advocacy. So someone who may be getting discriminated against needs to try to stick up for themselves and advocate. So those are just some of the things I learned. So thanks for listening. All right, so the very last thing I wanted to do is just a couple of discussion questions where Zach is going to give his input, and that can kind of help me see how well I might have done. So the first question is, how did this activity highlight the definition of ageism for you?
It honestly opened up my eyes. I work in customer service, and it opened up my eyes to really the view I actually have on old people and just people who age in general, and realizing how I can better catch myself.
Yeah. So the second question is, before this activity, which age group or groups do you think would be primarily impacted by ageism?
Old people or like elderly, I definitely think they're the most of the group that is affected by ageism.
Yeah. And has that opinion changed at all or not really?
No.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. I definitely think in general older individuals are experience more ageism, as especially like that activity showed, where when we got to the older adults they had all negative attributes listed, which it's okay. We all have biased thoughts sometimes. But also younger adults report ageism as well, such as they're not taken as seriously or they're thought to be stupid or things like that. Um so next question is, where do you think any of the stereotypes you may have come from?
I think a big thing is when it comes with older people, especially, people just assume that they aren't great with technology, or people just assume that they don't really understand certain things. And I see it a lot at work where even people will just kind of explain things slower to them because they just assume that they have a slower mind.
Yeah. And what are some ways you can try to combat this moving forward?
But treating everybody like a person. I think if everybody treats everybody the same, then there's no possibility for bias involved.
Okay. Do you have any personal experience or examples of experiencing ageism, either personally or seeing someone else experience it?
My general manager does not love old people just because usually at work they bring in a kind of annoying uh, thing to deal with. And sometimes he'll just say it would be easier if no elderly people were around.
And then, very last question is, what value have you taken away from this presentation?
I got to learn that my girlfriend is smarter than I thought. And I got to learn a little bit myself regarding ageism, and just another bias that exists out in the world.
Well, thank you very much.